Chapter 74 Imperial Flight Technique. Han Li looked at Li Feiyu's domineering face with respect and remained silent, not knowing what to say. Suddenly, Li Feiyu's imposing air was abruptly retracted, returning him back to his jovial self. He suddenly winked his eye at Han Li and loudly said, "What do you think? Wasn't my imposing air realistic? Wasn't it overflowing with such an air of dominance, a formidable quality, that it made you admire me to the point of prostrating yourself in admiration, immediately resolving your heart to vow your loyalty and devotion to me?" Hearing these arrogant words, Han Li couldn't help but laugh bitterly because he was actually moved by the Li Feiyu's resolute words. However, Li Feiyu's last words immediately reverted him to his true colors. Han Li harshly stared at him for a short moment and gnashed his teeth together before saying, "Formidable character. I see you're more like a coward." Li Feiyu did not mind this harsh criticism. Instead, he started laughing loudly in a very carefree manner, apparently very happy that he could manipulate Han Li in this way. However, Han Li slowly recovered his composure, and while Li Feiyu was still laughing, he indifferently said, "I have already reminded about your predicament, which you clearly understood. Now, I will solemnly ask you once again. Would you be willing to dispel your martial arts? If you do, I might still be able to prolong your life for a few more years, enabling you to live with Zhang Shuer for a longer period of time. Will you truly not consider this option?" Li Feiyu's laughter suddenly choked to a stop. His face deepened and his eyes fiercely pierced into Han Li, who closed his mouth. But Han Li's expression remained the same and did not falter in returning his gaze. After the time it takes to brew a cup of tea, Li Feiyu retracted the penetrative gaze from his eyes. His complexion returned to a much better state. "Han Li, I have already told you that I will definitely not consider voluntarily discarding my martial arts. I know that you are looking out for me, but don't mention this again, alright?" he said with an unyielding attitude, his words containing a beseeching tone. "Moreover, do you think that Zhang Shuer will be able to look up to me if I became a mediocre person without the strength to even win against a chicken?" Li Feiyu asked with a mocking tone. Han Li was speechless. He turned his head to one side, and his eyes followed the small road that Li Feiyu had come from. After calmly looking around for a moment, he opened his mouth to say, "Since you have already made your decision, then I will no longer try to persuade you otherwise. Hurry up, you should leave right now. Hopefully, you and Lady Zhang Shuer can become a happy couple." At Han Li's words, Li Feiyu's face was immediately covered in a smile. He strongly patted Han Li's shoulder several times. "Good, brother, these are the kinds of words that I love to hear. As of today, they are also the words that make me the happiest. I will be leaving first." With a few leaps, he disappeared down a small road, his silhouette vanishing without a trace. "Oh, how it aches." Han Li quickly grabbed at his shoulder. Li Feiyu's multiple slaps had secretly contained inner strength, making his shoulder immediately swell until it looked like a small red bun. This time, his suffering was not small. "This fool actually used inner strength to retaliate just because I poked at his sore spot," Han Li thought, grimacing in pain while fishing out a medicinal paste. He took off his upper garment to spread the paste across his shoulder to heal his injury. Sigh. "It is with great difficulty that I finally do a good deed, but this is how I end up. I really am not suited to doing good deeds. I should probably get back to comprehending my magic techniques. The next time I see him, I'll get my revenge for this incident," Han Li thought with a hint of annoyance. After a long stretch of time had passed, Han Li turned 18 years old. In this period of time, the Seven Mysteries sect and the Feral Wolf gang had continued fighting until they finally declared war on each other. Since then, several small skirmishes and big clashes had broken out at the border between the two powerhouses. All of the disciples, including Han Li, were affected by these battles, making Han Li feel endless sorrow and grief. The large bell outside the valley rang out more frequently than usual as a result of the increased number of injuries, giving Han Li the opportunity to practice quite a few difficult medicinal techniques, causing him to have great progress in his medicinal expertise. But even with Han Li's magical hands that seemed able to bring the dead back to life, there were still quite a few high-ranking sect members who had succumbed to their injuries. They either died in the battlefield or on the way back from the front lines, not even giving Han Li the slightest opportunity to save their lives. It was also because of this that both sides revealed their young prodigies, who assumed the positions of their fallen comrades. These talented youths included Wuxia Sanin Erbao from the Feral Wolf Gang and Jie Shangxiang from the Seven Mysteries sect. Li Feiyu was also included among these talented youths because he had personally beheaded Zi Yizong, thus obtaining the revered position of division head of the External Blade Division. Li Feiyu could already be considered as a person of high authority. His relationship with Zhang Shuer was also progressing rapidly, already to the point where marriage discussions were held. Aware of the upcoming marriage, Han Li could only sigh. Who could know whether what Li Feiyu was doing was right? After all, he was not Li Feiyu, nor had Han Li walked in his shoes. Thus, Han Li was incapable of making a decision regarding Li Feiyu's course of actions, but thinking back, Han Li would not have had the courage to seek for his loved one's hand in marriage while knowing that his death was imminent. As a result, Han Li could only pretend to be deaf and mute. He was aware that no matter how close he was to Li Feiyu, there were some lines he could not cross. Li Feiyu was his good friend, so of course Han Li had to be considerate of his choices. Additionally, an extremely important matter recently occurred, forcing him to divert a large portion of his attention. Through countless failures, Han Li finally learned how to use the Imperial flight technique. The Imperial flight technique was similar to Heaven's Eye technique. Both of them were supplementary techniques and could only be performed on one's own body instead of on others. However, its practical use was better than Heaven's Eye technique by a substantial amount. After using Imperial flight technique, Han Li felt his body become as light as a swallow. Just by lightly tapping his toe on the ground, he was able to flash by several tens of feet without expending the slightest effort. In addition, the high-speed sensation of rushing through the air was so addicting that Han Li would wildly run around the valley 5 or 6 times on a daily basis. Aside from his small addiction, he became an expert of Quangong 1. Of course, this acceleration was different from acceleration achieved by using the technique Shifting Smoke Steps. Shifting Smoke Steps was the sect's secret technique that made the impossible possible by using a copious amount of power to increase speed within a short distance. This kind of movement technique could only reveal its greatest potential in narrow spaces. In contrast, Imperial flight technique gradually used magic power in small amounts throughout its execution, minimizing the burden on the body. Han Li was capable of running wildly at will without developing any of the symptoms that were normally exhibited when the body was undergoing extreme stress. Moreover, this technique would continue until he ran out of magic power or until he willingly stopped supplying magic power. As a result, Imperial flight technique was an essential technique commonly used by low-level cultivators while traveling across the land. One Quangong is a Chinese martial arts technique that involves running up a plank supported against a wall. In wuxia, the practitioner is eventually able to walk over water and travel as light as a feather, etc.